Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this, the second match in round two of the International Reparation Debate Competition 2025. So far, one team has secured that spot in the quarterfinals, and here to see if they can join them are two titans of debating, both hailing from Jamaica. We have Team Campion College in proposition and Team Hampton School in opposition. I am Ravan Thomas Matthews, and it is an honor to be your chair judge for this match. Of course, this competition would not have been possible without some key partners and sponsors. So I want to take this opportunity to give them a shout out. Firstly, University of the West Indies, CARICOM, the CARICOM Reparation Commission, the Center for Reparations Research, the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment, the Repair Campaign, the P.J. Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Public Advocacy, and the University of Hull. Thank you very much to our sponsors and partners for making our inaugural competition thus far a success. And of course, we're looking forward to see what shapes out in the rest of these debates. Joining me on my panel to help me to determine the winner of this match will be two adjudicators who I'll invite to introduce themselves, starting with the lovely Roshana Jarrett.
Hi, good morning, teams. My name is Roshana Jarrett, and I'll serve as one of your wing adjudicators. I'm looking forward to an exciting match.
Thank you, Roshana. And not to be outdone, Mr. Joshua Atkins.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joshua Atkins. I'll be serving as a wing adjudicator as well. Like Roshan, I'm looking forward to an exciting match.
As am I. Now let's hear a little bit from the teams. We invite the proposition team, Campion College, to introduce themselves.
My name is Joshua Walcott. I will be your first speaker.
My name is Emily Malhedo, and I'll be second speaker.
My name is Jaden Clark, and I'll be the third speaker in this match.
Thank you very much to the proposition team. In similar fashion, we invite the opposition team, Hampton School, to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amoy Francis, and I am the leader of the opposition.
Good morning. My name is Sishona Ebanks, and I'm the second speaker.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nashe Patterson, and I'm the third speaker.
Thank you very much. The motion before us today reads, this House would reject symbolic gestures of atonement for colonialism, such as museums, apologies, or memorials that do not include economic reparations. Once more, this House would reject symbolic gestures of atonement for colonialism that do not include economic reparations. Teams, you know the speaking times and the structure, but for the sake of the viewing audience, we will go through it once more. The first speaker on either team gets 7 minutes. The second speaker will get 6 minutes. The third speaker will get 5 minutes to present their speech. The first and last minute of each speech is what we call protected time. During protected time, no points of information will be allowed. Outside of protected time, points of information are not only allowed, they are absolutely encouraged. And of course, in between speeches, we have that exciting period of cross-examination. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that cross-examination period when we get there. Ladies and gentlemen, I know the teams are ready. I am ready. And I'm sure you are ready. With no further delay, we get the second match in round 2 underway. We invite the proposition speaker from Campion College, Joshua Walcott, to open this debate. Hear, hear.
Okay, so before I begin my speech, a few points of context. There has never been a formal apology for slavery in Britain. no museums to acknowledge the tragedies which took place, no memorial to show respect to the millions and millions of slaves which they stole from their homes without like respect to their rights and their human dignity. And there has been no apology issued by like Britain for slavery after the report. So let us be clear, right? This action from Britain and other colonial powers has led to the cycle of poverty in many Caribbean countries, including underdevelopment and poor economic and social conditions directly traceable to slavery. And their refusal to acknowledge that they are actually responsible for slavery and they're the reason why this has taken place has led to like negative consequences that have been affecting Jamaica for years. And so when these things actually pass, it will be 5, 10, or even 20 years in the future. And the question at the heart of this debate is, should former colonies say, yes, thank you for this, or should they say, no, we want some like money to go along with the apologies or like memorials acknowledging slavery? And so a few points will be expanded on during this debate. First, I'll outline the model. And second, I'll outline 2 substantive arguments. The first substantive argument showing that symbolic gestures are meaningless without economic reparations. And the second argument showing that monetary compensation is likely once these symbolic gestures are rejected. And so first, our model. We don't accept gifts or the building of any memorials or apologies. And when those are planned or built, we make public statements saying that we do not accept / are not satisfied and make demands for monetary compensation. So that's sort of the policy that will be used for like Caribbean countries or like Jamaica specifically. And monetary compensation that we would demand would be something like around £50 million. So not anything ridiculous like the total amount estimated that Britain took from Jamaica, but it would also be something, it's something more reasonable while also trying to get like a large chunk of money out of Britain as possible, right? There are 2 burdens in this debate. Proposition burdens are to show that symbolic gestures of atonement by themselves are insufficient, and rejecting them if they aren't coupled with economic reparations is likely to produce better outcomes. And opposition's burden is to show that either symbolic gestures of atonement are sufficient, or that rejecting them if they aren't coupled with economic reparations is likely to lead to worse outcomes. Now, our first argument is that a symbolic gesture won't have meaning unless it's coupled with economic reparations. And the simple principle behind this is that words without actions doesn't mean anything. And it's understood in law and daily society. So if I shoot you in the arm or if I like stab you and I just say, sorry, bro, right? Nobody's forgiving the person who said sorry, right? Usually for that person to be forgiven, it has to be coupled with some sort of economic payment to make up for damages or even improving the situation which you were responsible for. So I don't know, like bringing them to the hospital, right? The healing process from like a particular harm involves a real acknowledgement of the seriousness of the harm which took place in Jamaica and an attempt to solve the issues which stem from all that harm. So unless this is rectified, unless there's like a serious acknowledgement and attempt to solve the problem, none of the actual problems which took place in Jamaica would have been acknowledged or recognized by Jamaican citizens, right? And so regular Caribbean citizens won't feel emotionally or societally healed and put together by like the superficial acknowledgements offered by and just simply an apology or a memorial. And so the impact of this argument is that Jamaicans on a whole are going to feel disrespected, right? They're not going to feel like there's any justice that has been done once they get like a museum or memorial acknowledging that there is some sort of culpability from them for slavery, and they still won't like do anything about it. The impact of this on British nationals is that those in Britain sympathetic to the cause of slavery would like feel a certain sort of guilt because they'll understand that their nation doesn't seriously want to rectify the issues which took place in Jamaica, and they would understand that they are at fault or they're somewhat culpable in the idea of Jamaicans. Jamaicans are like Caribbean people not getting the recognition and the putting together that they actually deserve. And so the impact on the Jamaican diaspora is that people are Jamaicans in the diaspora and just like Jamaicans in general, is that people are just going to be unsatisfied by the results of reparation. So they're not going to feel like it's adequate. Now, rebuttal that opposition could potentially give to this argument is that apologies and like education can be gained from the building of memorials and like the issuing of apologies, yeah, that can sort of start conversations that promote like understanding and reconciliation. We say that most critical to this debate to consider are Caribbean nationals. And the hard truth is apologies and like general like conversations won't put food on the table for like regular Jamaican people. So we say on our side, it's likely that you get actual reconciliation, which is monetary payment to make them whole again, and the apology, which would go along with it, which is like a double whammy of positive outcomes, right? So they acknowledge the chance for foreign relations. Oh yeah, we sort of acknowledge the chance for foreign relations to be disturbed. However, we think that it would look vindictive on the part of Britain, and so we think that they're more likely give like economic compensation. And I'll expand on that a little more now, right? Okay, essentially why economic compensation is likely to be the case once they decide that once Jamaica like calls Britain up for not dispensing economic compensation is because like it would be an acknowledgement of culpability from Britain. And once they acknowledge that there is culpability, the only thing left to do is like restitution, right? So the large like Caribbean diaspora existing in Britain, if there's no restitution, there's likely to be like protests and riots from groups who acknowledge that Britain does actually acknowledge that it is culpable and that like slavery was something that was wrong and they perpetuated. And so any claims that are made, Britain has a good chance of giving into. And in the case where they don't, we think that they'll like be seen as vindictive and they'll be seen as bad. So like they're more likely to give into the claims for monetary reparations, and that would sort of help out Jamaican people. And with that, proposition rests.
And thank you very much to the first speaker from the proposition. We now invite the first speaker from the opposition, Zamoy Francis, to extend the case for that side of the House.
Imagine a nation that was brutally invaded, its people enslaved, and its culture erased, its resources stolen. Decades later, the oppressors finally acknowledge their crimes. They build memorials, return stolen artifacts, and issue a formal apology. Now imagine that the victims reject these acts, outright dismissing them as worthless simply because they do not come with a financial payout. Mr. Speaker, honorable members of this House, timekeeper, and my most misguided opponents, a pleasant good morning. We stand here to debate a motion that is impactful in nature yet controversial in design. This House would reject symbolic gestures of atonement for colonialism that do not include economic reparations. Let me make it abundantly clear, we the opposition strongly disagree with this motion. I will demonstrate why being in agreement is not just ill-conceived but strategically disastrous, how symbolic acts can be a stepping stone to economic reparation and their necessity due to intrinsic value. My deputy will expound on how rejecting symbolic gestures could hinder progress and how not all former colonies require repatriation, and my member of opposition conclude and solidify why we have won this match. Since it was not defined, rejection in this debate is not mere criticism of symbolic gestures. It is the act of outright dismissing and refusing to engage with. The proposition seeks to instill an either-or mentality where without economic reparations, there would be no need for symbolic gestures. In rebuttal to the Prime Minister, the refusal to acknowledge that Britain is the result for these effects are the reasons they need symbolic gestures to begin the discussion. It is the beginning, not the end. To combat your model, who guarantees that this £50 million will be accepted and transferred from the colonizers? Without cultural restoration, economic development is unsustainable. If we reject apologies, return artifacts and official admissions, if guilt, we weaken our legal and moral position. You mention acknowledgement, then you are combating yourself. Acknowledgement is a form of symbolic gesture, and in accordance with the CARICOM 10-point plan, it is the first step. A people without knowledge of their history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. My opponents, do you wish to poison the deeply set roots of our history for economic gain? Mr. Speaker, the proposition's narrow focus will have us believe that symbolic reparations are an empty gesture, insufficient without the immediate inclusion of economic restitution, without money. Let us remember that these gestures serve as tangible acknowledgements of past injustices, laying the groundwork for more substantive reparations, as not even Rome was built in a day. Look at Germany's recognition of its colonial atrocities in Namibia, as outlined by Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, who emphasized, and I quote, "In light of Germany's historical and moral responsibility, we ask Namibia and the descendants of victims for forgiveness." This gesture is not merely a hollow statement. It is not simply a symbolic apology. It represents a first step towards acknowledging historical wrongs, as the Prime Minister mentioned, and establishing a dialogue that eventually led to more substantial reparations, both symbolic and financial. One came after the other, but the gestures were first properly received and not rejected under the guise that they must be accompanied by economic advancement. We must recognize, my opponents, that colonialism's effects were not just economic, but also social, cultural, and psychological. So why do you feel symbolic retribution is only impactful when paired with economic benefits with your $50 million? Can the erosion of dignity, the suffering, the erasure of culture only be corrected by an increase in global competitiveness? We highlight and agree that there is an importance for hospitals, food, education, etc., which were also stripped of us by the colonizers. However, we need not underscore the significance of symbolic gestures in the journey towards true reconciliation. To dismiss symbolic gestures would be to ignore the profound need for cultural restoration and the healing of historic wounds. The idea of incremental justice means that economic reparations should not be viewed as a one-off payment, $50 million, but as a progressive process that builds over time, starting with symbolic gestures. According to the Curriculum 10-point plan, the first step in reparation is apology and acknowledgement of historical wrongs. Without it, the case for reparations becomes an isolated demand without historical legitimacy. This plan outlines a phased approach, starting with acknowledgement, moving toward cultural rehabilitation, and then financial redress. This ensures that reparations are not reduced to mere payouts, but become a comprehensive and lasting process of justice. Rejecting symbolic gestures does not accelerate economic reparation, it sabotages them. If colonial powers are never forced to admit their crimes, how can we ever expect them to pay? Caribbean historian Hilary Beckles in Britain's Black Debt makes this exact argument, stating that acknowledgement of historical wrongdoing is a critical first step in securing reparations. He points to how the British government's admission of atrocities in Kenya's Mau Mau uprising created a legal precedent that eventually led to financial compensation. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, rejecting symbolic gestures risks losing all forms of atonement. Mr. Speaker, it is easy to argue for tangible reparations in the form of monetary compensation. But let us ask ourselves intelligently, if we completely disregard symbolic gestures, do we not risk the erasement of acknowledging historical wrongs? An apology can be defined as a regretful acknowledgement of an offense. In our terms, Mr. Speaker, it is the foundation of a legal journey that is true, long-standing reparation. Without the apology, without a symbolic gesture, we cannot expect accountability. Without accountability, there is no moral or legal pressure for financial restitution. One must come after the other. Even if they do not immediately result in economic compensation, symbolic acts of atonement carry intrinsic value that cannot be understated. Symbolic reparations are important because they acknowledge the dignity and humanity of the victims of colonialism, of the humans. Let us be clear, my opponents, rejecting symbolic reparation unless tied to immediate economic gain is a dangerous miscalculation. If we reject this, colonial governments will never have to admit to their wrongdoing. If we reject museums and memorials, future generations lose the education necessary to continue the fight for justice. If we reject the return of stolen artifacts, we allow our history to remain in the hands of our oppressors. As historian Vern Shepherd argues, the fight for reparation is a fight for historical truth, a fight that the proposition seeks to sabotage. If we do not force former colonial powers to publicly acknowledge their crimes, we leave the door open for revisionist history, where colonialism is downplayed or even justified. The opposition pauses.
And thank you very much to the first opposition speaker, Zamoy Francis. At this point in time, we're going to enter into that period of cross-examination that I was hinting at earlier. So this will see the opposing team, Hampton School, posing questions to Campion College. Each question can last no more than 10 seconds, and only one person at a time can ask questions from the team that is asking the question. However, the entire team that is answering the question can chip in within that 30-second period allotted to answering the question to ensure that the response is a robust one. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get this cross-examination underway, and we will start the time when you ask your first question, Hampton School.
Since reparations are often a legal, long, and diplomatic process, how do you propose we secure financial compensation without first securing a public admission of guilt?
Point is that with the public admission of guilt, you'd also be demanding economic reparation. So the point is that you'd reject it if it doesn't come with monetary compensation, but then you tell them, redo it this time with economic reparations and the monetary compensation, right? So the legal and the legal process exists on both sides. If you're saying that reparations are going to take longer because there's like a starting of conversations and that's going to eventually lead to some sort of economic reparation, you pretty much have to deal with the same thing on your side. It's not ridiculous.
And the next question, Hampton.
If an apology is meaningless without money, does that mean Germany's apology to Namibia or Britain's apology for the Mama atrocities had no impact at all?
It's not saying that they had no impact. The point is that they aren't meaningful to the extent where they make the person who the apology is directed to feel whole, right? It gives like the impression of it being completely meaningless when they're unable to issue an apology and actually back up that there was some culpability involved. You can't just say that, yes, we did this action, it was bad, it was culpable, and it's causing a lot of bad effects today without attempting to try and rectify the bad effects which you caused. That just positions Britain as like an immoral actor that doesn't care about what their actions actually lead to. And that's going to make the people inside Britain feel guilty, as we said before. And it's just going to make the people inside Jamaica feel like there was nothing actually.
Thank you for that response.
Wouldn't rejecting symbolic reparations make it easier for former colonial powers to deny or downplay their past crimes, making financial reparations even harder to secure?
The point is that at the point at which they're giving, where they're attempting to give things like apologies, museums, memorials, the discrediting of these certain issues wouldn't be taking place to like the extent to which you're saying they are, right? So if Britain is deciding, I want to give an apology for slavery, obviously that means like the British government isn't in the position to be like, oh yes, I want to downplay like the potential effects of slavery. What we're trying to do with demanding economic reparations is telling them to put their money where their mouth is and actually acknowledge that the harm that they're doing matters in respect to its actually damaging
That time. Thank you. And your final question for this segment, Hampton School.
Can you name a single former colony that rejected symbolic gestures and successfully secured financial reparations with proven improvements in the country?
Absolutely cannot name a single colony that was trying that in the Caribbean that was like given these sort of symbolic gestures and symbolic attempts at like rectifying these issues. because what these colonies have been doing, they're trying to downplay, they're not giving these apologies, they're not giving these things because they believe that it will show them as culpable, and then they'll actually have to give these economic reparations, right? Because they want to try and avoid these economic reparations, they're unwilling to sort of give these memorials, give these accountability. And if they give it while not giving the economic reparations, we're saying that they're just trying to like dodge the sort of, yeah, the real accountability that would help Jamaican citizens.
And thank you very much for that first half of the cross-examination. We now invite Campion College to pose questions to Team Hampton.
Okay. Our first question, we just want you to clarify or mechanize for us, how exactly do symbolic gestures and apologies materialize into economic reparations down the line? Because that analysis wasn't in your case.
Can you please repeat the question?
Okay. I'd just like you to explain how us accepting symbolic gestures will result in economic reparations down the line, as you posited, but didn't substantially explain.
No amount of money can fully compensate for stolen generations, destroyed cultures, and centuries of suffering. While economic support is necessary, it cannot replace the identity and historical truth that symbolic reparations provide. Money can be spent and lost, but historical recognition is permanent. Symbolic reparations ensure that colonial crimes are never forgotten or erased, reinforcing the legitimacy of ongoing claims for financial restitution.
Okay, and your next question, Campion.
Okay. Colonialism was a fundamentally economic system of exploitation. So how do you justify responding to it with only non-economic measures like apologies and museums? I think that's
Symbolic. Symbolic and economic reparations are mutually exclusive. In fact, are not mutually exclusive. One strengthens the other. Without acknowledgement of a wrongdoing, economic reparations lack legitimacy and public support. We first have to acknowledge that the wrong was done. We first have to acknowledge that there was a mistake. We first have to acknowledge that the colonizers stripped us of our culture and our dignity. Then we can proceed for proper development.
You say that symbolic gestures are necessary for starting conversations, which is more likely to cause a discussion about the actual harms which Jamaica was stripped of, passively accepting apologies or calling out and refusing symbolic gestures based on the idea of reparations.
Can you please repeat?
You said that symbolic gestures are necessary for starting conversations, which is more likely to cause a discussion about the actual harms which took place in Jamaica during colonialism, passively accepting apologies or calling out and refusing symbolic gestures based on the premise of reparation.
Calling out requires an admission of a wrong done, which is a symbolic gesture, and it is the first step in the CARICOM 10-point plan. Therefore, we have to first set the framework and the foundation before we can build upon it. There is no successful model that has been built on an unstable foundation. We're not saying that it is the end, it is the beginning.
And thank you very much, Campion College. We now invite the second speaker from Team Campion, Emily Melhado.
Adjudicators, members of the proposition, good morning to you all. As the second speaker from opposition, I'll continue this debate by strongly proposing the motion. This House would reject symbolic gestures of atonement for colonialism that do not include economic reparations by rebutting points earlier made by the proposition, then delving into facts. Firstly, momentary compensation will significantly improve the lives of Caribbean people. Why is momentary compensation likely to occur once demanded? One question needs to be answered. Why have colonial powers refused to apologize, build memorials, and build museums in the past? Because this implicates culpability. Once they've acknowledged their culpability, the only thing left to do is restitution. And with a large Caribbean diaspora existing in Britain, if there's no restitution, there is likely to be several protests and riots, as well as legal action being taken against Britain from several groups. Any claims that are made, Britain has a good chance of giving into, and in case worthy. The second substantive. Momentary compensation will significantly improve the lives of Caribbean people. Most Caribbean people live in poor conditions without proper access to healthcare or quality education. So the conditions under which Britain is willing to hand out their. So what we see in status quo is a large portion of the British population being critical of reparations. So the only way they would hand out money is through ensuring that it would go to fund these things directly, like health or education, or directly into the pockets of people. So the opposition could bring the argument that how do we know where the money is going? So whichever party is responsible for this compensation, if handled correctly, would be elected for probably about the next 30 years. The most significant and talked about topic in relation to slavery since emancipation. If they manage to use it to help people, they will likely remain in power. And this is a good incentive for the government to adequately allocate these reparations. This would result in an overall better quality of life for Jamaicans, better infrastructure, and access to quality education and healthcare. Okay, now I will address some of the opposition. The opposition claims that apologies and memorials are first step. They have provided no incentive for why it would result in economic reparations. We heard no mechanism explaining how accepting an apology results in economic reparations on the line. They gave the example of Germany and accepted.
How do you not see how symbolic gestures would result in the economic development when we clearly stated that building foundation through these symbolic gestures could create lifetime economic opportunities that is not lasting but durable?
Okay, well, firstly, you have not explained how this is a direct correlation, how this correlates, because by saying that this is a first step, you have to show us why Britain would be willing to take the second step. You have not explained that way. So the opposition gave the example
information
accepted. They gave the example of Germany and Namibia, but failed to explain why that's likely to occur in that Caribbean context. They provided no incentive for why apologies and memorials will lead to actual economic reparations. I'd like to reiterate that the hardline approach of rejecting symbolic gestures draws attention to the issue of reparation. News of this rejection will spread like wildfire on a global stage as people try to understand why a country would reject an apology, prompting persons to read up on our history and wholesomely understand the nuances of colonialism. This is what sparks conversation and allows us to move towards reparations. The proposition rests.
Thank you very much. We now invite Tishana Ibanks from Hampton School to extend the case for team opposition.
Esteemed judges, distinguished guests, my fellow opponents, and my timekeeper, good morning. As the second speaker of this House today, I stand firmly to wholeheartedly oppose the motion that this House would reject symbolic gestures of atonement for colonialism, such as museums, apologies, and memorials that do not include economic reparations. Mr. Speaker, let it be known that our final question in the cross-question segment was to name a single country, and we did not even say two, but one, where symbolic gestures were rejected, and that country secured financial reparations for economic benefits, and you were unable to prove that one weakness of your own argument. You have not said how we will definitely get the 50 million from Britain, yet you are attacking our foolproof analysis. An act of culpability, a formal recognition of guilt, is not just symbolic. It forces former colonial powers to take responsibility, opening the door for legal claims and financial settlements. If governments refuse to acknowledge their crimes, they evade accountability altogether. Keep this in mind as I demonstrate how rejecting symbolic gestures, if they are not followed by economic reparation, could hinder progress, and how not all former colonies prioritize economic reparations. To do so, makes us appear driven solely by financial gain rather than by a deeper need for recognition and restoration. My opponents, consider the motion you support. When our former colonizers are willing to atone for their atrocities via returning and developing the same cultural identity that they strip us of, something far greater than money, you, my opponents, reject that? Mr. Speaker, dismissing symbolic gestures hinders progress by weakening moral and social cohesion. Apologies and commemorations validate communities, foster solidarity, and keep historical injustice in focus. Rejecting discourage activism and alienate marginalized groups. While economic policies take time, symbolic actions sustain advocacy, build public support, and create the momentum needed for lasting change. My opponents, let's not forget the consequences Zimbabwe faced when they rejected symbolic gestures from their former colonizers, the United Kingdom. Zimbabwe's rejection of symbolic reconciliation in 1980, demanding only economic reparations, diplomatic isolation, sanctions, and economic collapse. Without securing symbolic acknowledgement first, they lost the political leverage needed to push for financial justice. This proved that rejecting symbolic gestures outright weakens the reparations movement. Had Zimbabwe leveraged recognition strategically, they could have built international support and pressure for economic gains. I am simply saying, if you shut down dialogue by rejecting symbolic actions, how will you ever achieve the reparations you seek? The case can be distilled in one faulty claim. Symbolic gestures are performative and allow former colonial powers to escape financial responsibility. However, history proves otherwise. Symbolic recognition is not just rhetoric, it is a strategic tool denied that has been used to achieve economic reparations time and time again. Renowned Caribbean history, Hilary Beckles, a leading advocate for reparatory justice, reinforces this argument in his extensive work on the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparations. Beckles asserts that symbolic acknowledgement is not a substitute for financial reparation, but a crucial step in holding former colonial powers accountable. His research demonstrates that historical crimes must first be admitted before economic justice can be demanded. This is precisely what we see in the case of Holocaust reparations, where Germany's public atonement through memorials, education, and formal apologies create the legal and political conditions necessary for economic settlements. The UK's compensation to Mama victims followed official acknowledgement of British wrongdoing. Without symbolic recognition, their claims would have been weaker, aiding colonial powers in evading responsibility. Beckles warns that rejecting such gestures help erase colonial crimes. Symbolic acts pressure, set precedents, and drive economic justice. Yet, my opponents reject these first steps, as if demanding everything at once guarantees success. History proves engagement, yields better reparations. Dismissing symbolic gestures outright make us seem money-driven rather than seeking true justice. Worse, it plays into claims that we want handouts, not redress. The government demands, yet The government demands justice, yet rejects effort to restore our stolen identity. My opponents, look into what you're proposing and tell. How can you promise that the officials that govern the country are in need of a bigger and better life for the economy and not their own individual pockets? Mr. Speaker, not all former colonies prioritize economic reparations, and for a good reason. Money alone does not heal historical trauma. As historian the web do who is asserted, national reel and stagger on their way. They make hideous mistakes, they commit frightful wrongs, but they learn. Symbolic gestures, apologies, memorials, and museums are not empty. They are powerful tools for historical reckoning, public education, and national identity. They ensure that colonial atrocities are not erased, but acknowledged and confronted. Strategic nations leverage symbolic recognition to strengthen diplomatic ties and negotiate economic advantages instead of demanded one-time payer countries like Guyana and Barbados, prioritizing lasting economic opportunities such as trade agreements and debt relief. President Irfan Ali, 2023, called on the UK to accept responsibility for slavery, arguing that symbolic recognition fuels the push for reparations rather than undermining it. Similarly, Prime Minister Mia Mottley condemned the Church of England's €100 million pledge for failing to consult affected communities, proving that symbolism and economic reparations must work in tandem. Rejecting symbolic gestures shuts down opportunity for diplomacy and long-term economic benefits. So, my opponents, I plead and I beg you to revisit your stand. The opposition pauses. Thank you.
And thank you very much. We now enter once more into that period of cross-examination and invite Team Hampton to pose questions to the proposing team.
How do you plan to negotiate financial reparations without first using symbolic gestures to build diplomatic and public support?
Okay, so Joshua would have already addressed this. Taking this this hard line stance of rejecting symbolic gestures is actually what starts the negotiations and the process for economic reparations in the future. So when we reject these these apologies, that draws attention to the issue and actually gives us bargaining power. It allows other countries to get involved and try to understand the history of colonialism and see why we'd actually reject these apologies in the first place, which gives us then the leverage to negotiate and actually fight for reparations. We don't hear any mechanism on your side.
If we refuse all symbolic reparations without immediate financial compensation, wouldn't that give former colonial powers an excuse to avoid accountability altogether?
On the grounds that if you do not want what we stole from you, why do you want our money?
Okay, your side of the debate is actually where accountability is removed. So because you are waiting for an apology and allowing your former colonizers and metropoles to actually come forward and say, okay, we're sorry, and let's build a museum or an art gallery. You're allowing them to then say, okay, we determine where we've wronged you. Whereas on our side of the house, this more adversarial approach calls them out where they are. It kind of meets them in the middle and says, okay, you've wronged us in this way, and this is how you ought to repay us. Your kissing up approach doesn't reap the same benefits, and in fact, the ball isn't in your court. So you wait and wait for.
That is time. Your next question, Hampton School.
You claim that we're waiting for symbolic gestures as if you're not waiting for economic reparation. If we demand economic reparation first and fail, what is our backup plan for achieving justice?
Or do you seek to leave it to the same countries that subject us to penury and destitution?
Thank you. A reminder that only one person from the team can ask a question at a time. Campion, you may answer the first question.
Okay, so we pointed out why economic reparations are likely to be given from Britain. Those being the incentives of them not giving the economic reparations being seen as vindictive, and also people within the country, the several groups that exist in the Caribbean, seeing that they are actually culpable from them actually offering these sorts of symbolic gestures. and then that leading to the sort of negative impact. So as soon as we acknowledge that is likely on our side and quite unlikely on your side, because there is like not this, there just genuinely like isn't this incentive for countries like colonial powers to actually offer economic reparations. Once those things have been established and once like once they're not like called out and once like everybody sees them and believes that they have done like the superficial acknowledgement.
All right, time.
Thank you very much. We now invite Team Campion College to pose questions to Hampton School.
Okay, when the political will exist for these symbolic acknowledgements, wouldn't sanctions and other forms of like economic getting back at seem like vindictive to a populace that supports symbolic acknowledgements of slavery?
Can you please repeat the question?
When the political will exists for symbolic acknowledgements, wouldn't sanctions seem vindictive to a populace that supports the symbolic acknowledgements?
I am sorry, we are unclear on the basis and the foundation of your question. Can you word it in a different way?
When the political will exists for creating the symbolic like gestures, wouldn't sanctions seem vindictive to a British population or like a colonial population that supports the symbolic gestures?
Was it not vindictive when they were looting, taking our dignity, erasing our culture, and basically subjecting us to a lifelong battle with our one another?
Do you think that the colonial powers of 200 years ago have the same like political structure and foreign relations as they did as they do when they are in support of like creating symbolic gestures like apologies and museums, etc.?
Again, can you please repeat?
Do you think the Britain of 200 years ago has the same like foreign relations and beliefs as they have now?
The Britain of 2 years ago may have the same formal structure. However, the Caribbean members and the citizens of the colonies from the 2 years ago also still experience and still suffer from the long-lasting effects of slavery. We have mental barriers, physical barriers, psychological barriers, which we admit, as mentioned in both our speeches, can be corrected by economic reparations, but it must start with symbolic reparations as the first step.
Do you think that regular Jamaican citizens care more about a sort of superficial acknowledgement by colonial powers of the harm that they did, or do they care more about like getting a substantial amount of money to pay for things like healthcare?
Yes, I believe that the citizens would actually agree, and in the first place, that's why the government agreed to the CARICOM 10-point plan. And an apology goes a long way, especially given the mental, the psychological atrocities that we went through. We went through acculturation, and we're now regaining our identity. And with that being said, the first step of reparation is acknowledgement, followed by an apology, then
followed by cultural institutions, then financial reparation. We have to go in accordance with the CARICOM 10-point plan and not create our own fallacious model.
All right, thank you very much. For the second period of cross-examination, we have remaining only the final two speeches. But before then, we will allow for a 1-minute pause so that the teams can conclude those reply speeches. Your 1 minute starts now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we resume this match with the final speaker from Hampton School, Nasha Patterson. The floor is yours. Ready when you are ready.
Recording in progress.
Indeed, we can, and the floor is yours.
Mr. Speaker, throughout this debate, the opposition has demonstrated why rejecting symbolic gestures of atonement outright is not only misguided, but also a strategic disaster for the reparations movement. My first speaker established that symbolic gestures serve as a necessary foundation for economic reparations, proving that acknowledgement and apologies are the first steps in securing financial compensation, as seen in the case of Germany and Namibia. They further emphasize that the effects of colonialism extend beyond just economic harm. There is culture, psychological, and social damage that symbolic reparations help address. My second speaker expanded on this by sharing that rejecting symbolic gestures could actually hinder progress as it removes a crucial step in the reparations process. They also pointed out that not all former colonies have the same needs, meaning that an approach solely focused on financial compensation may not be universally applicable. Additionally, history has shown that acknowledgement of wrongdoing strengthens the case for financial reparations rather than weakening it. Without symbolic recognition, the fight for reparations lacks the historical legitimacy needed to sustain legal and political momentum. Zimbabwe's rejection of symbolic reconciliation in 1980, for example, led to diplomatic isolation and economic decline, proving that the acknowledgement must come before financial demands. Similarly, the UK's compensation to Myanmar victims only followed official recognition of British atrocities. The historical precedent is clear. Symbolic recognition sets the stage for economic reparations, not the other way around. Okay, Mr. Speaker, look at Guyana and Barbados, for instance. They literally leverage symbolic acknowledgement to negotiate lasting economic opportunities like trade. Prime Minister Mia Mottley's stance highlights the importance of both symbolic and tangible reparative actions, proving that these approaches must work in tandem. To reject symbolic gestures is to weaken the cause and diminish the broader right for justice. The proposition stated that symbolic gestures, etc., are not as impactful as money. But, Mr. Speaker, money alone cannot heal historical trauma or restore stolen cultural identity. What good is financial compensation for history and artifacts and dignity remain in the hands of colonizers? Justice is multifaceted. You also mentioned that apologies hold not much weight as money would. Mr. Speaker, this is false. When colonizers return stolen artifacts, rename colonial buildings, and formally apologize, they help undo historical erasure. These actions restore national pride, reaffirm cultural identity, and keep the injustices of colonialism in memory. Mr. Speaker, do you believe that financial reparations can undo centuries of psychological damage? Reclaiming our stolen history and forcing acknowledgement of colonial crimes ensures that these injustices are never repeated. Mr. Speaker, my opponents would have us My opponents would have us believe that acknowledgement is meaningless without financial restitution, but even the scripture teaches otherwise. When Zacchaeus repented, he first admitted his wrongdoing before offering repayment, because true justice begins with recognition. To reject symbolic gestures is to ignore the foundation on which reparations must be built, like the prodigal son, who was first welcomed home before receiving anything materialistic. We must understand that cultural restoration and acknowledgement are not empty but essential. If we dismiss them outright, we risk trading our cultural identity, like Esau, who sold his birthright for a mere meal. Justice is not just about money, Mr. Speaker, but what is lost. To reject symbolic gestures is to weaken our own cause, and that, Mr. Speaker, would be a grave mistake. The opposition pause.
And thank you very much for that reply speech. We now invite Jaden Clark to conclude the debate.
I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Okay, it takes Tash to care, a quote by Edward Siaga. So from the first speech, I believe that we won this debate, and I'll tell you exactly why. So firstly, Joshua would have opened the debate by outlining that there has been no attempt at apologizing or atoning for colonialism by Britain. But why is this important? Britain was responsible for the torture of millions of enslaved Africans. They exploited our human and natural resources. They extracted profits, and they only developed infrastructure that was profitable, like ports, where they neglected things like hospitals and schools. My worthy opponents may be screaming at their screens right now, trying to tell me that slavery happened centuries ago. And you'd be right. However, the effects of slavery and colonialism are alive and well in today's society. Jamaica suffers from extreme classism, which stemmed from the plantation system left to us so graciously by our former colonizers. Now, we identified some key groups in this debate. Firstly, the supporters, who would be the low and middle income members of the Caribbean, people who are strapped for money, or Black British persons in the Caribbean diaspora. And opposers would be, for example, maybe nationalist British citizens, because they don't want to be giving up their money. But in spite of all the actors, we posit that the most important group to consider are Caribbean nationals, who, because of our difficult and troubled history, are, like we said, they suffer from a host of economic problems. Most of them are low and middle income members of the Caribbean society, and the Caribbean society as a whole actually just suffers from things like strained public services, like healthcare and education. Because of these problems, allow me to explain first how the implications of colonialism manifest today. The opposition would have told you that it was a host of psychological effects or cultural erasure that exists today. I would tell you that that simply just is not the case. The psychological effects, they didn't actually explain. It was more of an assertion that we suffer from a host of psychological effects. I can assure you, my judges and worthy opponents, and all in attendance, I do not get up crying about slavery. What I do get up and see, what I see as an individual in the 21st century, is the host of economic problems that come about as a result of our history. And to the average Jamaican, the economic benefits of reparations are infinitely better than symbolic gestures, which are often superficial anyway. And even then, these aren't unique to asking or rather accepting symbolic gestures from our metropoles. So we have institutions like the National Gallery of Jamaica that actually aims to preserve our culture, to showcase these artifacts and artworks, Jamaican and Caribbean artworks. And because of this, it just isn't, this issue on opposition side is inconsequential. So I don't believe you should consider that at all. And secondly, the issue of cultural erasure is just not an issue in this debate at all. Jamaica's culture, the Caribbean's culture is alive and well, not only in our region, but globally. You have things like Caribana in Toronto, Notting Hill Carnival in London. Our culture is alive and well. It's booming. It's better than it's ever been. So don't listen to them. Right, so some more rebuttals. Opposition would have told us that apologies and symbolic gestures can spread awareness and start conversations and promote reconciliation. But this is unlikely to produce reparations, and we gave you structural reasons for this. What is most likely to raise awareness is the outright rejection of these museums and memorials. Why? Because I told you in our cross actually that it brings attention to the issue. People will want to discover, like, why have we rejected this in the first place? It brings attention to the issue, and it also puts pressure on Britain to actually find like meaningful ways to reconcile, meaningful ways to repay us, right? So there's also this analysis from our opponents that because of the artifacts that yes, I actually addressed this already, so I'll continue. We also heard examples of countries like Guyana and Barbados that are able to gain or get reparations through, the reconciliatory measures. We believe these are fringe cases, and I'll tell you why. Guyana and Barbados do not represent the majority in the Caribbean. These countries, like they have natural resources such as Guyana has oil, and Barbados is like one of the largest exporters in the Caribbean, along with Trinidad. So, you haven't accurately represented the entire Caribbean as a whole. And we tell you that because of the socio-economic situation in the Caribbean, most countries need economic reparations to support their social services, to support their local economies. So, and further from that, the opposition hasn't pointed out to us exactly how those economic reparations took place in Guyana and Barbados, and they haven't told us why they're likely to play out like that in the entire Caribbean. Right. So if on the injustices of colonialism in memory, we have plenty of injustice in Jamaica. Oh, right. Okay. Just to summarize, we would have won this debate because we actually mechanize our side of the house. Our outcomes are more likely, whereas opposition's outcomes just simply aren't mutually exclusive and can be gained on both sides of the house. Proud to propose. Thank you.
And thank you very much for concluding that debate. At this time, we will now go and deliberate and return to you with the results.
Why do reparations matter to me? In addition to our close proximity to each other, the Caribbean is unified by a shared experience of European colonial dominance, exploitation, and underdevelopment of our nations. Despite being fully emancipated, the Caribbean, stripped of nearly all it has to offer by Europe, is left helpless. Our former colonizers have a moral responsibility to pay reparations to remedy economic disparities, make amends for historical injustices, and begin the process of healing the nation.
In the hills of Malvern St. Elizabeth lies a school, the Hampton School.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David LeBron. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Khalida Wilson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zamore Francis, team captain.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Najee Maxwell.
And we are members of the Hampton School debate team.
Reparation matters because it adheres to international and legal laws, such as the rights of the victim, rights of compensation, rehabilitation, and restoration.
2, 1, go.
Okay, so reparation is important to me as we know our ancestors were once slaves and they were abused of their power and degraded. So with reparation now, it would create opportunities for healing and rebuilding of determination and self-development in the Black community. Okay, reparation matters to me because it shows acknowledgement and awareness of what they, the British, have done, the fact that they take full responsibility for their actions and that they're willing to remunerate.
In the past, our ancestors were taken advantage of, abused, and taken to foreign lands unknowing of what their futures would hold. Afterwards, the land was utilized and leaving nothing for them to use for their own economic development. Now, reparation will help these individuals, being Jamaicans, to help develop their country and to help us have a better economy.
Hampton School should join the reparation debate because we want to add our voice to the reparation discussion. We recently discovered that the men who established our school were once owners of enslaved Africans. The wealth that they garnered was used to lay the foundation for our institution, a school that is meant for young girls from modest backgrounds. These young ladies are optimally rounded and excel in areas both in and outside of the classroom.
Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this International Reparation Debate Competition. This International Reparation Debate Competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
And this initiative is phenomenal. And you know why? Because it's engaging with young people. And it's young people that I believe, are going to be the future of the reparatory justice movement. The greatest weapon that there is in this whole fight for reparatory justice is the young people of today. I hope this debate spurs a whole new generation of advocates for reparatory justice, and the UK and the EU have got to make amends for the ills of the transatlantic slavery. This is going to be a phenomenal competition.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional / international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Where is the justice for the 5 million enslaved Africans trafficked to the Caribbean? Think about it. Chattel slavery didn't just end. It left deep, painful scars across each Caribbean country. The deliberate underdevelopment, the brutal trauma and violence we inherited. It's time to repair this damage so we can build thriving, sustainable economies where young people like us can dream big, achieve more, and live better lives right here in our own home. Do you see why repair matters? Stand with us. Join the calls for justice and sign the petition for reparations at repaircampaign.org/petition.
It's very important that this is understood because we can't talk about legacies before talking about what left those legacies on our landscape. Enslaved Africans were subjected to the worst atrocities imaginable. Kidnapping, storage in filthy barracoons, the Middle Passage, forced drowning as in the case of the slaver Zong, branding with hot iron, including by the church, with SPG being seared into the flesh of those they owned. Unrelenting field and factory labor, legal codes that rendered them non-human, and harsh punishments when they resisted enslavement. Deportation, dismemberment, hanging, imprisonment, severe flogging, including of women and the children. According to Lucille Mathurin Mayer, and I quote, "Neither age nor pregnancy exempted women from corporal punishment. Rather, they were laid down in the filthiest place the driver could find for floggings. Child labor was rampant, and women and girls faced sexual violence." Orlando Patterson wrote in his Sociology of Slavery the following: "The sexual exploitation of female slaves by white men was the most disgraceful aspect of Jamaican slave society." Unfortunately, the church was complicit in this crime against humanity. Initially, Christian planters did not think that the African was of theological significance. According to Elsa Gavaya, and I quote, "Early English slave law almost totally neglected the enslaved as a subject for religious instruction, as a member of a family, or as a member of society possessing some rights, as the same rights as everyone else."
Did you grow up on Anansi stories? Yep, most of us have. But did you know that Anansi played a major role in our ancestors' survival? So let's talk about it. He's more than just a trickster spider. He was a means of inspiration for resistance.
Anansi's cleverness in outsmarting his rivals mirrored tactics enslaved people used in their daily lives. By pretending to be foolish or inept, a technique known as play fool for catch wise, enslaved people lower their enslavers' expectations and reduce suspicion. These methods, inspired by Anansi, are known as Anansi tactics, or in Chui from Ghana, Anansi Sem. Anansi outwitted powerful animals and even white enslavers using cunning and wit. During the plantation era, Anansi tales were shared in enslaved quarters and sometimes in front of European enslavers. These stories, recorded in journals, reveal how enslaved people used public performances to mask hidden defiance. Plantation whites often missed the rebellious messages in these tales. Caribbean Anansi stories depict him evading punishment, tricking enslavers, and a whole plethora of adventures which highlight the resistance and survival through Anansi tactics.
400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what will be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight, we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, Master said there's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get the strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave, rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
And here's what does need reparative justice. It is the seasoning period when we landed on the soil and they took away our names and our gods and our culture, and no slave system that we understand thus far has ever had that deculturalization process embedded in the process of our enslavement. So our enslavement was not just physical, it was not just culture, it was spiritual, because you took me away from everything. Who then must I look up to? Who then must I emulate? Who then must I kill myself in order to elevate you?
What is common about the wealth? A flag raises high, but the strings still pull from London. We sing our anthems in borrowed tongues, march to the beat of siphons' drums, celebrating a freedom that still pays tribute. Independent? What is that when the governor's shadow still lingers? They tell us, we free. Tell that to the bones at Rappery. The 196 who fought and won only to drown in chains. Our Negmawan. Do the people of North Devon not hear the howls raging for their home? The tide spits their cries, their names foam in fury, salted by a sea that will not forget. They call us independent, yet a crown still sits above 14 nations, still bent at the knee, still ruled by a throne built from our gold. They took our labor, snatched our names, they welcomed our craft, then cast us adrift. Windrush mothers, fathers, exiled from the empire they built. What is common about the wealth? Our persistent potency that perseveres through acute artistry. We carve language into legacy, turn sorrow into song, drum resistance as rhythm, sink steel into symphony. We are the architects of new worlds, the poets, the painters, the prophets, who make home in remnants still, who forge futures from fractured pasts. They took the wealth, but we are the riches.
And remember that chattel slavery of the African people was also genocide. This is not highlighted sufficiently. If you take my home island of Barbados in the Caribbean, the British brought 600,000 people into Barbados. 600,000 Africans were brought into Barbados. The black population of Barbados today is 280,000. How do you reduce 600,000 to 290,000 after 200 years? They brought 3 million into Jamaica. At the end of the slavery malarkey, there were just about 600,000. The survival rate of African people in the Caribbean was about 17%. It was horrendous.
The Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community.
But I will say to you, therefore, that the issue of reparations for the transatlantic slavery is an issue that we will take up with you, and that the appropriate apology and compensation is paid, and that the international community accepts that this should never happen again.
And yes, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, slavery is a crime against humanity.
The concept of reparations would take the question of development repair, and it would be multi-generational. What needs to happen is face-to-face discussions, which we deem as absolutely important, because if you can't see me or hear me, it is not appropriate to be able to make a judgment as to who or what I am and what I should receive.
Progress also means reparatory justice to heal historical wounds and climate justice to secure our future. We must be bold, demand what is old, and build a Caribbean that thrives.
Yeah, we're here. One sec.
Ladies and gentlemen, the results are in, and I know who the next team who will be moving on to the quarterfinals of the International Reparation Debate Competition 2025 is. I know the winner of this match. The motion before us read, this House would reject symbolic gestures of atonement for colonialism that do not include economic reparations. In other words, if someone is to give us a museum or apology or a memorial, but that does not come in that moment bundled with some sort of restitutive reparation, we will not take it. That is the debate that stood in front of us today. So one side necessarily needs to demand we will not take it. But interestingly enough, the opposing side, Hampton, took an interesting and valid spin on the debate. They say, well, quite frankly, we would take the symbolic gestures of atonement because it can lead to that economic reparations. And we thought that was interesting. Campion College demanded from Team Hampton some sort of mechanization for that. They demanded to understand how is it that accepting these symbolic gestures of atonement will necessarily lead to some sort of economic reparations. And we kind of understand why it is that Campion demanded such a mechanization. We think it's a reasonably intuitive idea that, you know, it's the building block, it's the foundation of a good relationship that can lead to an economic reparation. We kind of see the intuitiveness of that. But Campion is right. We absolutely do want a deeper sort of mechanization. What about that accepting of the symbolic gesture is going to necessarily or very likely lead to an economic reparation? So we want to agree somewhat with Campion College for pointing out the need for some greater mechanization for that. We think it's an intuitive enough idea. But then it's a case of the pot calling the kettle black, because Campion College tells us that, well, we're going to reject these kind of symbolic kind of reparations, and that's going to lead to better outcomes. That's going to strike up conversations in the international crowd, and that I assume is going to therefore lead to some sort of economic reparations. When we reject this symbolic atonement, the international community hears that's going to somehow lead to economic reparations. We think that we needed more mechanization on that as well. And so what we ended up with a mechanization roulette. So we can do one or two things, either buy both ideas or ignore both ideas. We think both ideas are intuitive enough that we credit them, though neither idea really gets the full mark. So where does that leave us in the debate? The question of, do we need money or do we need symbolism? Yes, I particularly enjoyed Hampton's appreciation that the symbolic gesture provides something intangible, but yet still valuable. And that is that deep appreciation that you did something wrong. That psychological trauma is very important. We hear as well that through the acts of getting museums and that kind of thing, that we get some sort of cultural enrichment and restoration of our history. And that intrinsically has value. And that value isn't just determined by a fat wad of cash. We like that idea from Hamptons. We really do buy the idea that there is value in the symbolic gestures outside of an economic value. And we want to thank Hampton for not just making that claim, but giving us some examples and warranting it out to tell us what are the value of these symbolic gestures of atonement. It's an easy thing to say that the symbolic gestures have value. It's an advanced and expert debater thing to tell me what that value is. And we want to give Hampton a big up for that. We think that was very good. We heard Campion College reject this idea that there is some sort of symbolic value in the symbolic gesture. That kind of rejection of that idea came to us from the reply speaker, Jaden Clark. We think that at that point in time in the debate, the last speech in the debate, is not sufficient to really give that rebuttal there. While it's good there, it's not sufficient enough to really diminish the strength of the argument that these symbolic gestures have value by addressing it in the reply speech. Even worse, the last speech of the debate, wherein Hampton would not have gotten the chance to defend their argument. We think that sort of clash analysis on the value of those symbolic gestures is something that should definitely have come up earlier on in the debate. We're also wondering as well, we need money, but what is the need for money? Necessarily to have the idea to that finally put the nail in the coffin and determine who, well, at least helped in large part to determine who the winner of this competition is, the winner of this match is. The idea that, well, if we accept the symbolic gestures, which have been proven to have value, we at least get that and the possibility of leading to economic returns. If we reject the symbolic gestures, we don't get that, and I'm not sure how we get the economic reparations. So in one world, we get one guaranteed thing with the possibility of another. In another world, we don't get the guaranteed symbolic gesture, and we don't understand how we get the economic reparation from rejecting the symbolic gesture. So the decision was clear to the judges on a unanimous vote. The team that will be moving on to the quarterfinals of this international competition is a team in opposition, Hampton School. I think I'm going to share congratulations, Team Hampton. Congratulations. I want to say commend the team. The scores at the end of this match see the winning team on 273 points. The Hampton Campion 265. Best speaker from this match comes to us from the winning team, and that is the first speaker, Zamoy Francis. Congratulations, Team Hampton.
Thank you very much, and you are a worthy opponent, Campion.
Absolutely. Once more, the scores ending the match: Hampton on 273 points, and Campion on 265 points. Hampton School moves on to the quarterfinals of this competition. Join us 1 p.m. sharp as we find out who will be joining them. The two teams vying for that spot. Pleasantville Secondary School from Trinidad and Tobago going up against Holy Childhood High School from Jamaica. And they will be debating the motion. This house believes that reparation demands should not be limited by what is financially feasible for the former colonial power. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been Ravon Thomas Matthews. Pleasure to be a chair judge, and I will see you at 1 p.m. Take care.